A conversation with Julia Angwin, investigative journalist, founder and editor-in-chief of the Markup, who will be sharing more on data tools like Simple Search and Blacklight and how they're helping on the fight against mis and disinformation. After that, we will be joined by Kiko Llaneras and Mariano Zafra from El País, who will walk us through how the newsroom changed to deal with the unexpected amount of data around COVID in Spain and also with the situation in the country, and to be producing works like the one we mentioned before. And you can find the link actually in the chat as well. From Spain, we will travel to Brazil to learn how a team of 30 reporters of a regional newspaper in the northeastern state of Pernambuco came together to collect data and follow police investigations to report and place the systemic issue of violence against women under public discussion. And finally, we will learn to identify positive deviance on data to produce more solutions-oriented journalism and help us counter bad news fatigue. I'd say this is a very positive way to end our plenary sessions at NIS Data. So shall we start, Adam?
Let's get into it, Vera. We are ready to start. I am delighted to be welcoming Julia Angwin to News Impact Summit. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Markup. The Markup produces meaningful data-centered journalism about technology and, crucially, the people affected by it. Julia has been at the forefront of this type of reporting for many years now. Julia, it is a total pleasure to have you join us at the News Impact Summit. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, firstly, it is 8 a.m., I think, on Thanksgiving morning for you. Yeah. So you get a huge amount of karma points today for your commitment to journalism and our journalists here who are attending. So thank you so much. Secondly, we only have 20 minutes and I have a ton of questions and I know the audience do. So I'm going to get right to it and try and stay laser focused throughout this chat. To kick off, we have a lot of Europeans, of course, in our audience today who might not be super aware of the work of the Markup. So maybe we could start, if you could just give a quick bit of background to yourself, but also the Markup and how it started.
Sure, I'd love to. And good morning. It's a delight to be here, even though I am going to have to start baking right afterwards. I am a longtime tech journalist. I grew up in Silicon Valley and I started coding in 5th grade. And I always thought I would actually go into technology as an industry, but I ended up covering it as a journalist. And I covered technology for years at the Wall Street Journal. And one thing I realized was that I could enhance my own investigative powers by using technology. So I hired a technologist to help me with my investigations, to collect data, to analyze data. I then moved to ProPublica and did the same. But ultimately, I just felt I wanted a newsroom that had this collaboration between programmers and journalists at its core. And that is what led to the founding of the Markup. We just launched in February of this year. So I think we were publishing for about a week before we all had to go home for the pandemic, and we haven't been back to our offices since. But the Markup is a really unique newsroom. It's nonprofit. We write about the impact of technology on society, and we use technology for our investigations. Our newsroom is half programmers, 5 journalists. And so we're a very small outfit, but we feel like the technology allows us to really superpower our investigations because we can collect data at scale and do analysis that other newsrooms don't have the resources to do.
Thank you, Julia. My work as Storyful was surrounded by data a lot of the time, and I spent many hours, days, and weeks really diving deep into data streams and collecting data. But one of the most interesting emergences of data in the public sphere, let's say, is the use of data collection as part of the audience engagement process right now. So in other words, like helping the audience to gather data either for newsrooms or for their own purposes. And of course, you released Blacklight earlier this year. And really, when I saw that tool come online, I was so excited. It really just seemed to be perfectly executed and was such a smart yet simple way of helping audiences understand how data affects their lives. Can you tell us a bit more about the origins of the project and where you've got to today?
Yeah, absolutely. So Blacklight, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's at markup.org/blacklight, is just a tool. You can enter a URL into it, and we actually at that moment go visit that website for you and run a bunch of tests in real time to see what kind of privacy invading techniques is this new website using. And so it's probably the only real-time forensic privacy tool that's available to like a regular person. And the reason we developed it was because we actually wanted to build it for our own investigative reporting purposes. So we started building it as a tool to try to figure out how to write about privacy. And as we built it, we realized this is just so cool. We should offer it to the public, which of course meant that it doubled the amount of time it took to build it, because building something sort of creaky for your own newsroom that's duct taped together is very different than building a product for consumers to use. But I feel like it has been so useful because there's so many ways to tell the story of privacy. And we have used Blacklight. We use Blacklight to tell a story. We investigated how all these websites for very sensitive topics like domestic violence and child sex trafficking unwittingly had been using a lot of privacy invading techniques on their websites. And we ran that story with the launch of the tool. And that's one way that people can get into a story, is they can read it, right? That's like the classic journalism entry point. Another way is to do really pretty data visualizations, which is something we didn't necessarily do with this story, but is a common journalistic technique. But the tool actually is another way to enter the story, because you can just look up your kid's school and see, well, how are they tracking at that school, and do I agree with it? And suddenly it's so much more relevant to you as a reader. And it actually tells you the same story, because the way we describe the tracking techniques, there's little links out where you can learn more. And so it actually tells you the same story, but in a way that's super relevant to the reader.
And you said on Twitter recently that sometimes tools are journalism, and I thought that just encapsulated it perfectly. And I love the fact that you were scratching your own itch in terms of your own newsroom and building a tool for yourself, and then decided, wait a minute, this has kind of wider use. And you also highlighted there that this isn't just a tool and technology, but what I really love about what you're doing at the Markup is how much you're combining different types of journalism. So you have the tool, you also do investigative pieces, you do amazing solutions pieces, but then you're also doing service journalism to tell people how to sort of help protect themselves online and so on and so forth. How do you editorially plan these pieces? Do you really think about every aspect of that when you set off and you make the series, or do you sort of get the data set or the tool out online and then engage with the audience to see what they might need next?
That's a really good question. We're such a new newsroom that I would be lying if I said we had a real template for this. We're kind of making it up as we go along. That said, for us, the thing that we focus on first is impact. How much does this affect people? So we have an investigative checklist that we fill out before we embark on one of these projects, because these projects are expensive and in terms of time and money, right? So, Blacklight was one programmer working for 18 months and other parts of the newsroom as well, and additional contract programmers. So it's an expensive operation. And so we want to be thoughtful about which ones we pursue. So we make our decision based on how important is this issue to the world, and how many people are affected by it, and how deeply are they affected, right? And so Blacklight met all that criteria, because every single person who uses the internet is affected by the sort of surveillance economy that has just bloomed into monetizing your data everywhere that you turn. And so for that reason, it made sense to build that tool. We also built this tool, Simple Search, which is really cool. And that was a totally different thing. That sort of arose from our investigation. It wasn't the start of the investigation. We did an investigation to quantify something that probably everyone has noticed, which is when you do a Google search, the top results often are Google's own properties or other searches on Google. And so we wanted to see how much room was that taking up and we measured it. We ran 15,000 searches, and we found that it was about 41% of the page. And so we thought, well, what does it look like after we published the investigation? We thought, what could we do to have readers have that own experience themselves, right? So we actually built a tool that strips all of that out of your search and just shows you what the links would have been if you hadn't seen all that content at the top, called Simple Search. And that tool was interesting because it was the opposite of Blacklight. It was really like, after we finished the investigation, we thought, let's do a thing that helps people bring them closer to this question and experience it for themselves.
That's one of the things I think that I love about the work, is how complementary those two tools are. And I think you answered my question in terms of it felt like there was a slightly different design process going on behind there. One other thing that I love is about your articles and generally the site in general is just the design layout and so on and so forth. You're very prepared to put explainers in to help the audience. From where do you get your sort of design inspiration and creativity? Do you have a team of designers in-house? Is this something that you work with external people on?
So we have one designer, Sam Morris, who's brilliant. He was at The Guardian for many years. And so everything you see is him. So just everyone give him a big shout out. And we are hoping to add more, but we're a pretty small group right now. We have one big advantage on our website, which is we have two big advantages. One is we don't use any trackers. So we don't have any add-in software that slows the page loading or that the designer has to work around. So there's literally no cookies set on our website if you come visit. So it makes it really fast. And it's also easy for a designer because they don't have to worry about all those externalities. The other thing about our website is we're not a high volume, massive, pump out millions of stories web place. We publish a couple times a week, and we want those stories to be really meaningful and impactful. So we have time to design them. And I think that makes a huge difference. We're kind of a bespoke operation.
So it sounds like there is a lot of UX thought in there. There's a lot of product thinking, and I guess there's even service design in there somewhere as well. And that's often the cornerstones of work that you see like this. And I think one of the challenges for many newsrooms is they might not possess those skills or those resources in-house or inside their team. You've explained a bit about what your team looks like, and it sounds like you have some sort of real data and design ninjas in there. But do you think any newsroom can start to approach this type of work and start thinking about tools as journalism, or do you think it can only be done by newsrooms who have developers and designers in-house?
Well, I have to say, like, the reason I founded the Markup was I felt that even though I'd been at some of the very best newsrooms in the world, that this type of thing needs to be done with a clean playing field. And I would say that there are a lot of reasons for that, but probably one of the most primary reasons for it is that there's a culture issue around merging the culture of programming and design and development with the culture of journalism. And so by building that from the start where it's all unified, so our programmers work in partnership with a journalist, and so they're teams and very collaborative, is something that is just really unique. Most places that I've worked, the data team is a service desk, it's a small group, and it's overstrapped because everyone in the newsroom is in line trying to get their help. And so it starts to feel a little bit like the post office where you're waiting in line to get your ticket. And so I wanted the opposite of that. We actually we do have more programmers on staff than we do journalists. And so we are over-resourced in that way. And so that makes it feel a little bit less like a scarcity issue where there's not this constant like, oh my God, can I get a programmer for this issue, right? And so people can be more creative in that space because we can brainstorm together and there's a possibility we can actually pull it off.
So let's flip the camera a bit and maybe point our focus on the communities that your work serves. I really feel like the next frontier of this work is enabling communities and individuals to gather and understand data themselves, to answer questions that they themselves might that they might have. Is this also how you see it? And we've had a really, I think, exciting few years in Europe, especially with people like Corrective and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism doing really powerful work of putting skills and tools in the hand of communities who are then also defining their own questions and doing their own investigations with help from newsrooms at a local and a national level. Is this sort of how you would see the next stage of this, is to really put as many of these tools in the hands of the public as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I would really love for Blacklight to be used by other newsrooms, right? It is a great reporting tool, and there have been a few stories, not maybe as many as I would like. I think a lot of newsrooms are really busy. There's a lot, a lot of news going on these days. But I think that we are a nonprofit, and our donors see us as a public service, and so we want to serve not just the public but other journalists, and so we hope that our tools will be used and also by the community, right? People can themselves use these tools and make their own decisions about like, oh, I'm going to write to my kids' school and ask them, why are they using this weird invasive technique? And it empowers them in a way. I think of it a little bit like there's so much fun about being an investigative journalist. It's like being a detective, right? You chase down all these clues and there's an aha moment, and I want to share that joy and excitement with our readers. And so these tools give them that opportunity to have that experience of discovery, that they are discovering the fact themselves. And like with Blacklight and with Simple Search, these facts didn't exist until they discovered them. Like we don't have a database somewhere of every website and what it's doing. The moment that you use that tool, Blacklight, on a website is when that data is created. So it really is yours. You created it, you can use it. We have a way where you can download it and keep it for yourself. And you can also send us a tip like, hey, could you investigate this? And so I want to share that excitement because I think I liked what Vera said earlier about, there is a lot of bad news fatigue out there. And I think it's important to try to engage with readers in a way that gives them a sense of agency instead of a sense of hopelessness. And a lot of times just reading investigative articles can feel very hopeless. And so I think tools is a really good way to give people the same information and honestly share that same outrage that we are trying to generate, which is like, this is a thing that is, you should think about, that maybe we don't want the world to be like this, but also give them a sense that they can do something about it.
There's an incredible media literacy play there as well, of course, in which you are teaching people how to do journalism, the value of journalism, how difficult that can be, but also the value of open data and all of those things. And so I really love it. I think there's a whole dimension there that we could dedicate another conference to. I want to give everyone in the chat a chance to ask their questions. I see a couple coming in already, but I have one more question for you, which is, who else in the US do you see doing this type of work that you think we should all be taking a look at? Who's got you excited at the minute in the world of data and news product?
Well, the thing is that what we're doing at the Markup isn't actually that new. There's so many great journalists, right? The Washington Post data team, the BuzzFeed data team, honestly, people like Jen LaFleur who've led data journalism in the US for years. And so I do want to be respectful of the fact that there are so many giants whose shoulders we're standing on, and we are just what we are doing is just building a newsroom around that, as opposed to having one person, solo in each newsroom around the country trying to do their own heroic work,
Well, you're very humble, Julia. I think, what you say is definitely true, but the execution of this is also very, very hard. Like, ideas are easy, and I think you and the team have executed this incredibly well. So I'm excited to see what happens next for you and the team. Angela, do we have some questions in the chat that we could pose to Julia?
Yes, we have a few. Hi, Julia. How are you?
Hi, great.
We have a question here from Amandre. Amandre asks, what are the challenges of running a team with such a big mix of abilities? And she added, more programmers than journalists. That's very interesting.
It's so interesting because everybody asked me when I was starting this, how are you going to get programmers? They're so expensive, right? And the truth is we do have to pay a premium, but we also have found that it's actually, there are way more programmers interested in this type of work. The challenge is actually on the other side, finding journalists who are technologically literate and good at interacting with the developers, because I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this. There's a certain type of journalists who went into the business because they hated math and wanted to write and are pretty numbers phobic, and there's also, and some of those people, a lot of those people are super talented, but it's really hard if you have somebody who treats technology like magic, right? So you probably all experienced this. There's somebody who will come up to the developer and say, I want you to do this, create this data set, right? And they think it's magic because they don't understand it. And so we have to work hard to make sure that we don't find people like that, because that's what makes the developers angry. And so it's actually about finding journalists who understand how to work with programmers, how to be respectful of their abilities and understand that there are some things they can do and some things they can't do, and that it's honestly going to be a collaboration to figure out what we can and can't do in each case.
One of the things we talk about a lot here, Julia, sorry to talk over the top of you, Angela. One of the things we talk about a lot here is obviously computational thinking as well, the ability to formulate a problem so it can also be solved by a computer. And it's something in newsrooms that I think is really important, is when you start to think about some of the journalistic problems and questions communities have in that sort of frame. I think it starts to you yield different results, and you definitely start looking at the way and the process of journalism very differently.
So one thing we do is actually our journalists need to write up sort of a methodology. They have to come up with a hypothesis and work with a programmer to say, is this a hypothesis we can test? How would we test it? What are the data we would need to collect? It's a little form they have to fill out. And it sort of encourages what I hadn't heard that term before, computational thinking, but I love it. And I'm going to steal it. So I'll credit you. But it is exactly to develop that sort of rigor about how can we make sure that this is a problem we can do and that we're not just tilting at windmills.
Awesome.